Like, you never know where it's going to be handy to have friends. Okay, last time we left off talking about... oh, wait, before I launch into this stuff, any other administrative sorts of questions? Did I mention the exam is coming up a week from Monday? So on Monday, I'll send out example questions. The format of the exam will be the same as last time, so it'll be 50 multiple choice and then one essay question. And I'll send out example essay questions on Monday and choose one of the three for the exam itself. I think that's all about that. Okay, so today we're going to finish off talking about motion perception and finish talking about biological motion and then implied motion. So we saw this last time, and when it's upside down, it's difficult to figure out what it is, but when it's right side up, it's a piece of cake. It's obvious what it is, right? So we're really good at detecting biological motion. So good, in fact, that if we get it slightly wrong, then it looks really weird and it's really off-putting.
Hi と返事をします。
はい。
いいえと返事をします。
いいえ。
顔をしかめます。
Opportunity to find a cigarette.
Oh, Hal, you read me? Who you read me, Hal?
Hello, Dad.
Because I can communicate in many of the ways that people do. I can tell you that I'm sad, mad.
機械が子供の能力を想定して作られ、人が近づくと大きな目をキョロキョロ。
Yeah, you bet. I'll call you back in within an hour. Okay.
We do not poll, of course. This is the Polar Express.
Mighty and all powerful. This, I promise.
Image Metrics is a markerless performance-driven animation company. We specialize in high-quality facial animation for video games and films. Whew. I mean, really? Can we just skip that question? They really, really are bad. Not good.
女性にとってお肌は大事ですよね。だから虫除けはブレイシャワーを使ってます。意外と錆びないんですよね。
アンドロイドもおすすめ。お肌に優しいプレシャワー。
So that's the Uncanny Valley. And I think the Zombie Express is an apt name for that. So, other examples. Can you think of other examples of... Or, sorry.
Wait, the Uncanny Valley was too lifelike or not lifelike?
Well, the problem is that it's close but not quite. So the idea was like, this was the scale of lifelikeness. And so you sort of, and this is what, the cute factor? What was the y-axis?
I think it's socially acceptable.
Yeah, okay, socially acceptable. So as you get closer to humans, you know, little dolls that coo and things like that. They're not really very lifelike, but they're pretty cute. Like that little dancing doll thing, that was pretty cute and pretty socially acceptable. Furbies and things like that, or the little, what are the little hamster things that run around? Zuzu pets, yeah. Those are kind of cute until they get caught in your hair, and then they're really obnoxious. Just ask my daughters. But then as you get closer here, there's a point where you're just not quite close enough, that you're pretty darn lifelike, but it's just not quite there, and it's really off-putting. So the Polar Express is a great example of that, where their faces just don't quite move in the right way, and you can really detect that it's like humans, but something's not quite right. So we're really, really good at detecting biological motion. We can detect, and we've actually got cells, or these monkeys that we recorded from, have cells in the superior temporal sulcus that responds to biological motion. So not responding to any other kind of motion, but it's biological motion. And in this case, in this particular cell, it's the point light walker moving backwards to the right. So and this cell fires robustly to that. The same point light walker, if it's moving forward to the right, you get a less robust response. Forward to the left, and then random dots that are moving in sort of in a coherent way, it doesn't really respond to. So so back to the point. The Uncanny Valley is sort of this point in here where you're just not quite there, and it's just really bizarre. Probably because you're activating some of these, but not all of these. And so you can see that there's some difference there. There's something that's not quite on. So, how do we get this? Do we learn it? So, apparently not. So, our propensity to detect biological motion is probably with us at 2 days old, for example. So Simeon had infants, newborn infants of 2 days old, look at biological motion, random motion, and inverted biological motion, and they did a looking time experiment. So they measure how long these infants are looking at one or the other, with the idea that the infant will look at the preferred stimulus, will look at the thing that it thinks is the coolest. And so infants do discriminate between biological motion and random motion. So they show a significant preference for the biological motion. So they will discriminate between biological and random dots, and then they'll discriminate also they'll show a preference for biological motion over random motion, and upright biological motion over inverted biological motion. So we like these point light walkers, and we can see them very, very early on, even at 2 days of life, which is kind of cool. All right, that's my last slide on biological motion. Any questions about biological motion in the Uncanny Valley? Yeah, Ariel.
Biological motion, is it just human, or do they, like with engines, do they try like a bird or a dog or something like that?
We're pretty good with things that are not humans. We're really good with humans, but we're also pretty good at other things. For the infants, I think that they tried other stimuli, so like dogs and birds and things like that. I think. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to go back and double check. Sir?
Do you think it'd make a difference if it was like really slowed down, if it was sped up?
Yes, it would. So it's got to be sort of in a plausible range. So with our point light walker, it was sort of a plausible gait, right? That you could expect a person doing that. If you really sped it up, then you're going to get less of a response, particularly from these neurons that are detecting biological motion. So it's going to be sort of like this curve that we've talked about, sort of this preference curve. So too fast, and you're not going to get a lot of responding. Too slow, and you're not going to get a lot of responding. So and it's just like watching a movie. If you watch movies and fast forward, then it looks really weird as people sort of move around and do things really quickly. Or if they move really, really slowly, that looks a little bit weird too. So yes, it does have to be within a plausible range, but you're still going to be able to detect it, even if it is faster or slower, just not quite as well. Yeah, other questions? All right. So what is the occlusion heuristic? So this is an experiment done by Ramachandran, where they wanted to know how the visual system interprets ambiguous apparent motion. So there are kind of two possibilities here. One is that it interprets it in the most ecologically plausible way. So the idea being that objects don't simply disappear, but one object can occlude another. The other possibility is the most economical way. If two interpretations are possible, you take the one that implies the least motion. So if you have this, and then you see this, what do you assume just happened? Say it louder, I heard some mumbles. Okay, so they overlap, right? So you start off with a square and a triangle, and where did the triangle go? So they both move over, and the square moved up, right? So the square moves up to occlude the triangle. So yeah, so there are other possibilities, though, right? So there's the possibility that they both fused, that the square and the triangle became one, and that's why you only see this. Another possibility is that the square moved, but the triangle disappeared, or the triangle is being occluded by the square. So which one of these is the most, I guess, ecologically valid? Number 3? Is that the mumbling? Yeah. Okay. All right. So things in the real world don't typically disappear. So this one, ecologically, probably not very likely. Things typically don't fuse together unless they're made out of liquid, and these look pretty solid. So, and then they would have a bigger surface area if they did. So this is probably ecologically the most plausible, the most likely thing to happen. And in our experience, that's usually what happens, is as things move, that one will occlude the other. What if you see this, and then that? Okay, same thing. Are they fused, or
I think they fused.
You think they fused, and you think they oh, let's go the other direction. Sorry. All right, so you see this, and then this. So one interpretation is that they fused. Another interpretation might be that they're occluding one another. It's going to be a little bit more difficult in this case because they're the exact same size, and so that might be a little bit harder. What about if you see this and then that? Okay. So now, if you see this and then this, usually people interpret it like this. So that may be a fusion, that may be an occlusion. But then if you see this and then this, you interpret it differently. Why do you interpret it differently if there's a block present?
It's kind of like that bird where, like when you see, when we're looking at the bird when they're moving together, you just assume that they all form part of a single thing.
Okay.
If you see two things similar and in the same region, and so in one moves, you assume the other moves with it.
Okay. Tom?
So, I mean, I'm not answering the question. I have a different question. If you have more experience with technology, are you more likely? It's like with the first one, the block and the triangle. I thought, all right, the triangle just disappeared and the block moved, because it's pretty easy, like on a computer, just to push the delete button and move the box. So if you had somebody who's like more, has had more experience with technology versus somebody who hasn't had very much experience, and they have more experience with, all right, the tree covered, I moved this way and the bush went behind the tree. Does that have any influence on the way that this is interpreted?
Probably, yeah. So how lifelike things are is probably going to affect it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm having trouble interpreting it the way that you're supposed to be interpreting it according to the picture, because they're just dots, and I know that on PowerPoint you can just like move a dot. And if it was like a bird or a tree,
yeah,
maybe I would see it the way that, like, they're setting up this model, but it's not really working for me.
I'm trying to make this look lifelike. All right. So this is a ball. Bear with me here. It's got some shading going on over here so that it looks more ball-like. And then what was the other one? The other one was a square. So this is a box. Also fairly lifelike. It's got shading going on over here. So this is what you see first, and then you see now this. So yeah, so if we have photos of a scene, and if it's more lifelike, then you're going to have probably a different interpretation, right? So you're probably going to be more able to imagine these things happening, more able to sort of picture these things of the ball being of obstructed by or occluded by the box. So being able to sort of convince people that this is in fact the case is going to be a little bit difficult. And the more lifelike it is, the more easily we can sort of interpret it as being something that you would see in the real world. Yeah. But back to this one. So here, at first, you see the occlusion of the ball, but now if we put the box on there, you see the occlusion of a box, and the interpretation is different.
Would it just be an easier heuristic for us to move them horizontally rather than diagonally? Is that why we have it included?
Yeah, I think that's on the right track, sir.
I also think it's more likely that the ball gets obstructed by the box because the box is bigger than the ball. Like a little shake of the head would be able to tell if the ball is being occluded by something exactly the same as it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So a couple of reasons why C is going to be more likely. So when you see the box there, it's if you see things. What's more likely? What's going to happen more often in the real world? Things are going to move in the same direction, or one thing's going to move one direction and one thing's going to move the other direction. One's going to move in a completely different direction. It's more likely that things are going to move in the same direction. And so that's a little bit more parsimonious explanation. That's a little simpler explanation. Remember the two heuristics that we were talking about? Let's go back here. One is ecological validity, or ecological plausibility. The other one is economy, the most economical way. So it's more economical to assume that everything moves in the same direction. You have to have another direction of movement in order to have a different interpretation of this. Plus, it's also more economical for this to hide behind that than for it to hide behind something that's exactly the same size. That's probably not very likely.
Well, I was thinking about, like, even with the change blindness example, going from the lab to the real world is, like, super different. I mean, that, like, looking at this, it's like the most simple explanation of the concept is removing objects on a screen. But if you're, like, looking in a room, you open the door, there's a basketball in a box, and another basketball, close the door and open it, and there's only one basketball in the box, the basketball is not going to be perfectly occluding the other basketball. It's much more logical if the basketball's in the box.
Right, yeah. 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 So we make some assumptions about the way that the world works, and when we have these implied motion things, we're bringing those assumptions to bear. So we're using these heuristics to interpret our world. All right, so how do we imply motion if there's no motion actually there? So this one's kind of a good example. I like this one.
That little girl must be heavy.
Or she's moving fast. This one's okay. It's not quite as good as the last one. This one implies motion, I think. This one, not a lot of implied motion. I just think it's a great sculpture. I have a friend who's a sculptor, and he goes on and on about St. Gaudens. All right, so implied motions. Pictures of stationary objects can depict action that involves motion. So there are a couple of ways that you can do this. One is through representational momentum. So the observers show that implied motion is carried out in the observer's mind.
I'm sorry, what is the importance of the occlusion heuristic? Why was that important?
Oh, so the occlusion heuristic is that we can get, so we've sort of switched topics. Sorry. So let's go here. So the occlusion heuristic is that we assume ecological plausibility, basically, that things just don't disappear, things don't sort of fuse. We bring to bear our experience, and we assume that the triangle is still there. It's just being obstructed by something else in the scene.
More implications for implied motion, biological motion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sort of jumping through topics to here. I should have like signposts that say, "Now entering implied motion." And how much do I want to say about implied motion? Not a whole lot, actually. This is the last thing that I want to talk about. So this is kind of a cool experiment, though. And I'm not sure that my PowerPoints really do it justice. So I tried to give you the PowerPoint version of this experiment. So the idea is that I'm going to show you 4 pictures. The first 3 imply some motion in the object, and then the 4th picture is a test picture, and it's either slightly higher or slightly lower than the last one that you saw. And the question is, can you detect whether it's higher or lower? So you're to indicate whether the memory and the test picture were in the same position. And usually what happens is that people carry some momentum through these things. I don't know if this is on a timer or not. Yes? No? That one's not. Alright, so this is to distract you. And then, which one is at the same level as the other one, as the last one? Everybody like number 1? The middle one, number 2? Okay, number 3? Nobody likes number 3? Okay. Oh, I wish I had a good way of no, go back. Oh, shoot. Okay. Stupid thing. All right, this is the one we need to pay attention to. All right, let's see how steady my hand is. Oh, that was higher. It is the first one. How about that? But everybody liked number 2, or the majority of people liked number 2. How come you liked number 2? Because it's still going up. Rockets go up, right? So you, sort of in your mind's eye, you assume that the rocket is still going up. Guess what happens with anvils? All right, so is that one at the same level? Yeah, it is hard to tell. I should redo this PowerPoint so that I can actually demonstrate what it is. But yeah, so the idea is experimentally, when you give this test to experimental subjects, they assume that the rocket continues to go up. So they do the exact same thing that you did, where they assume the rocket continues to go up. They assume the anvil comes down a little bit, and so in their mind's eye, in their memory representation, the anvil is a little bit lower, or the anvils that are a little bit lower are judged to be the same height as the. So this one, people usually don't select this one, but people will select this one. So the test picture, they'll select the heavier object that's lower than the memory object. When things have implied motion that's going up, people will not select this. They'll be able to discriminate between that. So what is your brain doing while you're viewing implied motion? Was the question for this experiment. So Kortze and Nancy Canwisher, showed people, actually, let me show you these first. They showed people these kinds of pictures. So implied motion here, this is what is that? An orca? Dolphin? Dolphin, let's say dolphin. Here's an animal without implied motion. Here's a scene with implied motion. Here's a scene without implied motion. And what they found is that in motion-sensitive areas, in area MT, for example, that you do, even when you're looking at still images, you do have more activity in these motion-sensitive regions for implied motion than for no implied motion. And both of these are higher than houses, for example. So scenes that don't have any motion, that can't move, you don't get much signal going on in area MT. All right. So, summary for the motion topic. Moving gives us lots of information, so we can get color in some instances. We can get depth from motion, shape perception, distance, things like that. You use things like the corollary discharge signal to distinguish self-motion from observer motion. So this is actually kind of important because the image, as you're moving through the scene, the image on your retina is going to move. So how do you know that it's you moving and not the rest of the world moving? Well, you need to have some motor feedback in order to figure that out. We talked a little bit about neurons and movement perception, so the aperture problem for V1 neurons. How does the visual system go about solving the aperture problem?
Where MT compiles multiple signals, right?
Right, yeah. So V1 neurons still have the aperture problem. They're still just going to signal whether something is in a particular orientation, moving in a certain direction. But MT receives information from all of the V1 neurons. And so it's going to be able to compile that information, just like Justin said. Yeah, so MT puts the motion signals together, and then we talked a little bit about higher order motion processes today. So biological motion and implied motion. And some motion heuristics, actually, that didn't make it onto the slide. All right, any questions about motion?
Would motion heuristics be considered higher order processes?
Yeah, so you're bringing in sort of higher order top-down assumptions about what's going on in the world. And we actually talked about that a bit. So if you've got experience with PowerPoints, you know that, well, this is how PowerPoints work. If you have experience with real-world objects, then you know how those work. And so your perception may be different depending on how we're sort of demonstrating these things. Stacey? Right, yeah. So the idea with corollary discharge theory was that you've got a motor signal that's going to your eyes, but you've also got this corollary discharge signal that's going to your visual centers. So your visual centers know, oh, hey, the eyes are moving, we should expect the image to move as well. And so you've got this comparator that's comparing the corollary discharge signal with the movement signal coming from the eyes. And if they coincide, what do we perceive? This could be a question for everybody. So if there's no difference between what you're expecting and what you're seeing, right, you don't perceive any movement. But if there is a difference, either you move your eyes and the image doesn't move, that means that the image is moving, right, that the object in the world is moving. If the object moves, so if the image moves but you don't have a corollary discharge signal, then you also perceive motion. So anytime there's a conflict at the comparator, you perceive motion. Yeah. Other questions? You want to do a quiz?
Can it be open?
No. That's an easy one. I'll take easy questions like that all day.